We're back. In today's video, we're gonna take a pre-existing character design and look at how to retrofit it for character rigging using Duik Bassel. And we're gonna get today's character design from the sponsor of today's video, Envato Elements.
Envato Elements is a massive library of just about anything you would need as a motion designer. They have everything from Illustrator files to Photoshop files to After Effects templates to stock footage, music, and sound effects, and much, much more. Envato Elements is crazy affordable and comes with unlimited downloads.
And Envato Elements is hooking my audience up with a 70% discount. So if you're interested in checking it out, follow the link down in the description below to get that 70% discount and get started with Envato Elements.
Like I said, I'm gonna enlist the help of Envato Elements because instead of illustrating my character, so I'm gonna find a character design on Envato Elements that I can take and retrofit for my needs. This will save me massive amounts of time, and it allows me to show you how to take these pre-existing character designs and rig them up. Now, as you can see, I've made a massive collection of different character sets that are available on Envato Elements, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. As you can see, there's more character designs than I know what to do with. Now, I've selected this one because it comes with all these different characters, and I think there's a couple of these characters that will work for my needs. So all I have to do to use this is I click on the download button and I either select a project that I'm already working on, which I have, or if this is for a new project, I just create the project here. Then I hit download and boom, these characters are now mine.
Okay, so now that we've found some character designs that might work, we'll fire up Illustrator, I'll look through all the different character designs, and I'll pick one that I think will work for my needs.
Okay, so after looking at all my different options, this is the character that I decided upon for this intro. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the limbs and I'm going to just put them off to the side because these limbs that came with the character, we're not actually going to use these to rig up. We're just going to use these as reference. We're actually just going to reconstruct these in a way that will make it easy for rigging. Okay, so next I'm going to grab the rectangle tool and I'm going to create the waist here at the bottom of the body. Once I've created it, I'll select it, hit Control left bracket to send it behind the body, and I'll just adjust it till it is about the size that I want it to be. And that looks about right. Now I'm going to get started on the arm. I'm going to go grab the ellipse tool and I'm going to create an ellipse right here at the top of this arm just as a reference for how thick I want the upper arm to be. Okay, so I'll move it next to the body, and while clicking and holding Alt, I'll drag to create another ellipse, and then again I'll go to the elbow and I'll resize this ellipse so that it is giving me about how thick I want the elbow to be. Again, I'm just using these arms as a reference for recreating this limb for rigging. Then I will grab these two and just change the color so I know that this is for the arm. And again, holding Alt and dragging, I'll create another ellipse down here at the bottom for the wrist. And I'm just going to move these over closer to the body just to see how I'm doing lengthwise. I think it's a little too long, so I'll bring the wrist up a little bit to where I think the wrist is. And then with all three selected, I'll use the align tool to make sure that they're evenly spaced. And I'm just going to move them away just to have some working room. Okay, so now I'll grab the rectangle tool and I will start from the middle ellipse and make sure I'm aligned with the middle of it, and I will connect to the middle of the upper ellipse. Now I'll grab the anchor point tool and holding shift and click will allow me to move the anchor point, and I'm gonna just put these anchor points slightly above the middle of the upper ellipse like this because I'm going to have this rectangle kind of bow out like this. So I'll just spend a little bit here just kind of refining this, and I didn't quite get that anchor point on the line there, so I'll move it, and I'm just kind of looking at how I want this. And this top edge, because it's going to be in the middle ellipse, doesn't need to actually be curved, and that looks good. I notice I'm not quite on the line there, so I'll just adjust that, and I'll come over here, and this is a little too out, so I'll just make these adjustments until I like what I'm seeing here. And if I zoom out, that looks pretty good. Yeah, that looks good. Okay, actually, as I'm looking at this, I think maybe my elbow's a little too thick. So I'm actually gonna just make it a little bit smaller, which means I'll have to just realign everything here. Okay, and I think I want it to bow out just a little bit more. So I'll just grab these handles and just make this curve a little bit more thick. That looks good. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's work on the bottom part of the arm. But before we do that, I'm just gonna group everything by selecting everything and hitting Control G. Okay, to do this bottom half, I'll grab the pen tool, and just like the top half, I'll draw a rectangle that's tapered that connects the middle circle to the end circle, and make sure that those are connected from the middle of each circle. I actually don't need that ellipse, so I can just delete it because our sleeve has a squared off end. And sometimes I like to just check the rotation, make sure it looks good bended. You don't have to do this, but sometimes I like to do that just to make sure I'm on the right path. And I notice that the end is kind of slanted and maybe just a sliver, it's maybe just a little bit thicker. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so now we need to create a wrist. So I'll grab the ellipse tool and I'll just make a small little ellipse. And just like with the rest of the arm, once we have this ellipse, we're gonna go back, grab the rectangle tool and go through the middle and up. Doesn't matter how far because we're just making this little wrist here. And then with those two selected, I will change it to the color of the skin, and then selecting those, send them back with Control left bracket. All right, so now we are actually going to use this hand. First thing I notice is that the hand is a little bit thicker than I made that wrist. So what I'll do is I'll refine the shape a little bit. I'll get rid of one of these anchor points. I think I don't need this one. And then holding Shift C, I'll grab the anchor point tool and use that while holding Control to click on these anchor points, which will make them square. And I'll move that into place. And it looks like I need to scale up my wrist a little bit. So I'll scale it up, and then I will just make sure that my hand goes through the middle of that circle. Now, I just want to emphasize why we are using so many different circles, because these are all the joints that need to rotate, and they need to rotate around the circle. And for them to rotate around the circle and not create any additional seams, they have to be going through the middle of that circle so that when they rotate, it looks good. Okay, with the arm mostly done, I'm just going to group the wrist and the forearm together so that upper arm is a group, the forearm is a group, and then of course the hand is its own group. Okay, so let's move this book out of the way. Now, the other arm is going to be mostly the same, so I can just duplicate these by holding Alt and dragging. And I'm just going to take the hand from this arm and use it for my other arm. So again, I'll bring it over here, rotate it, and move it into place. And because I've already adjusted the width of the wrist here, it's mostly okay. I think there's just a little bit of adjustment that needs to happen. I'll just bring these. Again, I want this hand to be aligned with the middle of that circle that we made for the wrist, so that when we rotate the hand, it rotates around that circle and doesn't create any additional seams. Okay, so now with those little adjustments made, and I'm done with the other arm. Now let's get started on the legs. Okay, so I'll grab the shoe and I'm just going to move it over here. Now the legs, the process for creating the legs is very similar to the arms. Okay, so I'll go grab the ellipse tool just like with the arm, and I'll create the upper ellipse. And I'll position this so that the middle of the ellipse hits the bottom edge of the waist that we created earlier. And I'll just make sure they're the same color. Then holding Alt and dragging, I'll create the knee and the ankle. And I'm just gonna grab the original legs just to give me a reference for how long these legs should be and where the knee should be. And I'm gonna grab the foot because I'm actually realizing that I don't want to align to the bottom of the pant. I actually want to align where the ankle's gonna be on the bottom ellipse here. So that looks pretty good. Now I can move those pants back out of the way, and I'm gonna just adjust this middle knee, and actually I'm gonna use the blend tool so that we have a proper taper of the pant, an even taper. So to do that, I'll go to blend options and change it to specified steps, change it to 1, hit OK, then go back to object, blend, and make. Now we have 3 circles, and then I'll go back to object and expand, and that way we have 3 actual circles, ungroup those, and now I can use these circles to create the pant leg. And just like with the arm, I'll start with the upper part first, connect them through the middle using the pen tool, and I'll group that upper part, and then I'll do the same on the bottom, just going through the middle of the circles. And just like with the arm, I can actually delete this bottom circle, or actually I can just use it as my ankle. That looks good. Change it to the flesh color. And I'm gonna go into this group and actually cut this out using Control X and paste it. And I'll just use this as a reference for how thick my ankle should be and the tapering of the ankle. And just like with the wrist, we're just creating this little nub on the end of our, I can delete that anchor point. We're creating a nub at the end of our leg here for the shoe to rotate around. So we want it to be rounded. So we're using that ellipse, and that looks about right. So I'll grab those, group them, and then hit Control left bracket to make sure it's behind the pant leg. And now I'll grab the shoe and I'll just put the shoe in place, and looks like my little rectangle is above the shoe. So using the left bracket, we'll send it behind, and we'll just adjust that, and that's looking pretty good. And actually I'm realizing that the little nub needs to be grouped with the calf area. Okay, reposition that shoe again. That looks good. And now I can just select everything and hold Alt and drag it over. And it's okay if the legs overlap a little bit. I'm realizing that the top of my leg isn't aligned right. So I'll just align that to the edge of that ellipse. And because I duplicated this one is probably the same. And sure enough, okay. Good, those are aligned properly. So now we'll make sure this is aligned to the left or right edge, I guess it is. And then once we're properly aligned, hit Control left bracket to send it back. And then we'll grab this little part of the pant and hit Control right bracket to bring it to the front. And that looks pretty good. Now we have the legs done. Now, before we bring it into After Effects, I'm just gonna select the legs and I'm gonna separate them away from the body just to make things a little easier to work with and to select. And now let me show you how to properly bring this all into After Effects. One note that I want to mention before we jump into After Effects is the way that we've set up our character is specifically ideal for Duik Bassel. See, in a 3D program, what you would do is you would set your character up in what's called a T pose, but not so with 2D animation and specifically with Duik Bassel. Having your limbs, specifically the arms, facing downward in a straight line like this makes it easy to rig them up with Duik Bassel. So whenever you're setting up a character, this is how you should do it. Now that we're ready to go into After Effects, I'm going to be using Overlord, which is a nice little script that makes working between Illustrator and After Effects a breeze. Now, if you don't have Overlord, if you don't know what it is, you can go check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. And if Overlord is something you're not interested in or you don't have the money for it, well, you can go watch this video here where we show you all the different ways you can move files into After Effects. So the biggest part of this section is going to be showing you how I bring things in what order, and how I set up my character in After Effects from Illustrator. So let's move on. Okay, so the first thing I'll bring over is the hips. So I'll select them and push to AE. That brings the hips, and I'll rename the layer because that helps us to stay organized. Next, I'll bring over the torso. So I'll make sure everything on the torso is selected before pushing it. That puts everything on the same layer, and I'll label this as body. And I just want to point out that when dealing with the body, I'm going from the bottom to the top. So next is the neck, and then I'll move over the head shape. Now the head shape, I'm going to grab the head and these pieces of hair and the ear. And I guess I can also bring over the nose, and that brings it all in one layer. I'll label this head. And then I'll go grab the hair. I like to put the hair on a separate layer just in case I want to animate any kind of secondary action with the hair. I'll bring those over on their own layer. And again, make sure that I'm labeling everything. Back to Illustrator, I'll grab the eyes and put them on their own layer, relabel them, and then the eyebrows. And then I'll grab the mouth. Okay, so the whole body is in here now. I just need to parent things. So I'll parent everything on the head to the head, because all these elements should move with the movement of the head. Now I'll reposition the anchor point of the head to where it should be rotating. And then I'll parent the head to the neck. And then on the neck, I'll do the same thing. I'll move the anchor point, so that's the point of rotation. And then I will parent the neck to the body, and I'll parent the hips to the body as well, because I like my body to be kind of the main driver of my character. I'll change the color of these to green just to differentiate them from the other layers. And now that we're there, we can start on the arms. Okay, so for the arm, just like with the body, we'll start from the bottom. So I'll grab the hand first, push that, and relabel my layer to hand. Then I'll move up to the forearm, and that comes next, and relabel that to forearm. And then the last part, the upper arm, we'll just push that and label that as arm. And then for the right arm, we'll just do the same thing in the same order. Okay, so now I'll grab my right arm and I will bring those to the bottom of the layer stack, and then the left arm should be always on top. Now I'll bring over the legs. Now, unlike the arm, I'll start at the top of the leg and work my way down as I bring them into After Effects, ending with the foot. So I'll bring the thigh over first and I'll relabel that thigh. Then I will move on to the calf, push that into AE, relabel that calf, and then I will push the foot to AE and relabel that foot. Okay, so now that that's done, I will change the color to, let's say, orange, and I'll duplicate that, and I'll move that just underneath the body, but just above the right arm. And I'll change the color of this second leg to something different. That looks good. Okay, and this leg should be underneath the left arm. Okay, so it should start with the arm on top, the left arm on top, then the left leg, then your body layers should be in the middle, and then your right leg, which we'll move over in a second, and then your right arm. So this is the order in which you should set up your character. All right, so we're all ready to rig up our character, and I'm gonna start by rigging up this arm right here. So to do that, I'm just gonna zoom into this arm, and I'm going to solo the top part of the arm, and I'll go over to Duik and make sure I'm in the rigging section, and I will create an arm structure. And starting at the top, by holding control, I will drag this joint to the top until it aligns with the middle of this joint. Now, moving down the arm, I will solo the forearm and turn off the upper arm so that I'm just seeing the forearm. I'll grab this joint here, and holding control, I'll make sure it snaps right to the middle of this forearm and to the top edge. Moving on down the arm, I'll grab the hand controller here and doing the same thing, holding control, make sure it snaps to the middle of that circle we made on this little, on the wrist that we created in Illustrator. And then for the arm tip, this doesn't matter as much for this kind of rig, but I'll just place this at the top and make sure it's more or less aligned with the rest of the controllers. Doesn't have to be exactly at the tip. Like I said, for this rig, it doesn't really matter. Once this is done, I can turn on the rest of my arm just so I can see them. And the next thing is to parent your artwork to the structure layers. So I'll parent arm to arm, forearm to forearm, and hand to hand. That's why I labeled these this way, so it's easy to know which layer to parent to each structure layer. Once everything's parented up, you just grab all your structure layers and go over to Duik, go to the links and constraints section and hit auto rig. And now you have a functional bendy limb. Okay, and with that, we want to grab the arm and we want to parent that to the body. Now I'm gonna go down to the body and I'm gonna turn this one on so that we can align our arm. And to do that, I'll grab the controller, holding control and clicking, I can select these two layers, and then I'll just move this over to the body. That looks good. And then I'll select the hand controller and just kind of move the arm just to make sure that shoulder is in place, and that looks pretty good. Okay, so now that we have this arm rigged up, we can turn it off. We can turn the body off. And now, in fact, we'll just turn all of this off and we'll move on to the other arm by soloing just the arm, and we'll repeat the process over again. Okay, so now we have both arms rigged up. I will unsolo everything. We'll get started on the legs. And the legs are very similar to the arms. I'll solo the thigh, I'll go over to Duik, and I'll create a leg structure. Now I like to grab my structure layers and just place them above the layers that I'm working with. So that way I know when I need to parent them, it'll be easy to find. Okay, so starting with the thigh, just like with the arm, we'll hold control and we'll place this joint right in the middle of that upper circle. And then I'll grab the calf and I'll do the same thing here, making sure that it's in the middle of that circle. And then I'm just going to double check to make sure that we're aligned correctly on the calf, the upper calf. And like I said, this comes together very similarly as the arm. Now you'll notice the foot has all these other controllers. Now these are for if you want to use the puppet pin tool in the foot to create some foot roll. I'm not going to do that for this tutorial, but just to feel good about where I'm putting these, I'll just put these here where they would go. But after this, you can pretty much just ignore these controllers. You're really only concerned with these 3 joints. Okay, so now that everything's lined up correctly, I can do the same thing so I'll parent the thigh to the thigh, the calf to the calf, and the foot to the foot. Now, before we auto rig these structures, I'm going to select them and go over to Duik and hit duplicate. And I'm not going to move anything because everything's already in place. I'm just going to grab these layers and I'm going to put them above the other leg layers that we have, and then I'm going to parent these leg layers to the new structure layers here. This is cutting our workload in half, so instead of rigging one up and then moving it and then rigging the next one up and moving it, we can just have everything aligned. That's why we didn't move these leg layers. We can just line everything up once and then rig everything and then move everything. So now that everything's lined up for these 2 legs, I can actually grab these structure layers, go over to Duik and hit auto rig. And again, I'll make sure that everything is rotating correctly, and it looks like it is. It's just rotating the opposite way, which we'll fix in a moment. And then I will go to these structure layers and hit auto rig. And again, because we already lined everything up, this layer behind should look good. And we need to solo those so we can actually see it. Looks good. Now we'll go up to the foot controller and we'll hit the reverse on both of these so they bend the right way. Good. And now we need to unsolo everything. And the next thing is we need to move our legs into position. So to do that, I'll grab this foot controller and I'll grab the thigh for this foot controller, which is my first structure layer, and I'll just move those up here. And I want to align this joint with this edge here on my hip. So I can do that by just hitting control, and it might actually help because we have so many other layers right here. It actually sometimes helps to just solo that and solo the hip in that way. And we want to solo the actual thigh layer, the artwork layer, so that I can see if I'm aligned here on the side. So with those soloed, again, I'm going to grab those 2 things, and looks like I am aligned with the bottom edge, and now I'm just aligning this little edge here. And that looks pretty good. And I know that that is aligned. So now I just have to move on to the other leg. Now, the last thing I need to do is I'm going to select both the thigh structure layers and I'm going to parent them to the hips. So now when I turn everything back on, Okay, so now that everything's rigged up, I can go over to Duik and select all the structure layers and turn them off, and I can even shy them here, turn on the shy guy. So that hides them away from view, cleans up my timeline, and now all I should have is my artwork layers and my foot layers. And everything, if I grab the body and move the body around, everything should work. Now you notice that the hands are stuck in place. So all you have to do there is select your hand controllers and parent them to your body. Now your character will move like a normal character. And at this point, you're ready to start animating.
All right, guys, that about does it for today's video. If you found that this video was helpful, hit that like button. And if you guys have any ideas for future tutorials, make sure you leave those ideas in the comment section below. This video actually came from a comment from Caleb suggesting the topic for today's video, so I really appreciate that. Shout out to Caleb. And if you guys want more content like this in the future, make sure you're subscribed. And if you are subscribed, hit that bell icon. You guys know how YouTube works. With all that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video.